The forest was quiet that evening. The wind moved gently through the tall trees, carrying with it the dry rustle of leaves. Each step on the narrow path made a soft crunch, echoing in the silence. A young woman walked there, her back slightly bent under the weight of a small, worn backpack. Her shoes were old, and her sweater, though neat, had faded from many washes. Her name was Sarah. She was 32 years old, a single mother raising her little boy on her own. Life had not been easy for her. Each day felt like a balance between what she could give and what she had to sacrifice. Her son Daniel was only 6. He needed her strength, and so she carried it with her, even when she felt weak inside. The forest was not a place she often visited. She had taken this path because it was shorter on her way home. Money for transport was tight, and sometimes she walked long distances to save what little she earned. Her job at a small diner did not pay much, but she held on to it, knowing every coin meant food on the table and rent paid on time. Sarah stopped for a moment and took a deep breath. The air smelled of damp soil and fallen leaves. She closed her eyes for a second, allowing herself to feel calm. The forest seemed endless, stretching into shadows that whispered of quiet secrets. Just as she was about to continue walking, a faint sound caught her ear. At first, she thought it was only the wind, but when she stilled, she heard it again, a muffled noise, faint, strained, almost hidden under the weight of silence. Her heart gave a small jump. She turned her head, scanning the trees around her. Nothing moved, except the soft sway of branches. She stepped off the path, her shoes pressing against damp earth. The sound grew clearer, a weak cry, almost a whisper. Her body stiffened. Fear came quickly, but so did her sense of duty. "Is someone there?" she called softly, her voice trembling. No answer, only a broken sound, like a plea. Sarah hesitated, then pushed forward. The trees grew closer together, and the light dimmed. After several steps, she noticed something strange. The ground ahead looked disturbed, as though someone had dug into it. Piles of earth lay scattered, half covered by leaves. Her breath caught in her throat, and then she saw it. A hand, pale, trembling, weakly pushing through the soil. Sarah froze, her heart pounding. For a moment, her mind told her to run. This was too strange, too frightening. But then she heard the sound again, clearer now. A voice, broken, hoarse. "Help, please." Sarah dropped her backpack and fell to her knees. Her hands moved without thinking, brushing away dirt, pulling at roots, clearing the soil around the trapped figure. Her palms burned, her nails filled with mud, but she did not stop. The more she dug, the more of him appeared. A man, his clothes expensive but torn, his body covered in bruises. He gasped for air as his chest was freed. His face was sharp, his hair dark and tangled. His eyes, though weak, looked at her with desperate gratitude. "You're safe now," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. She did not know who he was, or how he came to be buried here. She only knew she could not walk away. The man coughed, his lips dry and cracked. He tried to speak, but his voice was broken. Sarah supported his head with her hand, brushing dirt from his mouth. "Don't talk," she said firmly. "Save your strength." But then, against her warning, he whispered something, just a few words, and though she could not yet understand their full weight, they carried a depth that made her eyes sting with sudden tears. "Tell her, I'm sorry." Sarah froze, her breath catching in her chest. Whoever this man was, his pain was not only in his body, it lived deep inside him, in the sorrow he carried. She swallowed hard, steadying her voice. "We'll get you out. You'll be okay." As she worked to free him, the forest grew darker and the air colder. Yet in that moment, a fragile bond formed between a struggling single mother and a broken man buried alive in the woods. Sarah did not know it yet, but what he whispered would soon change both their lives. Sarah's hands worked quickly, pulling away soil with every breath. Her palms ached, and dirt clung beneath her fingernails, but she did not stop. The man's weak coughs pushed her forward. His chest rose unevenly, as though every breath was a battle. She leaned close to him. "Stay with me," she said softly. Her voice was calm, though inside her heart raced. The man's lips moved again, but the words were too faint. Sarah shook her head. "Don't try to speak. Save your strength." She dug faster, pushing aside rocks, branches, and clumps of mud. Slowly, more of his body became free. His arms trembled as he tried to move, but he was too weak. She placed her hands gently over his wrists. "Don't force yourself. I'll do it." The forest around them grew colder as the sun dipped lower. Long shadows stretched over the leaves, and the air filled with the scent of damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called. The world felt heavy, as though holding its breath for this strange encounter. Finally, after what felt like endless digging, Sarah pulled enough soil away to free his torso. She sat back, breathing hard, wiping her forehead with her sleeve. The man blinked, his eyes adjusting to the fading light. His chest rose more evenly now, though every breath still looked painful. Sarah studied him carefully. His clothes told her he was no ordinary man. The fabric, though torn, was fine and costly. A watch clung weakly to his wrist, its face scratched but still shining faintly. He was not someone who belonged buried in the dirt like this. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice low. The man coughed, shaking his head slowly. He tried to speak, but the words broke apart in his throat. Sarah hushed him again, reaching into her backpack. She pulled out a small bottle of water she always carried for her walks. Opening it quickly, she held it near his lips. "Here, just a little," he sipped, his throat moving with difficulty. But even that small drink seemed to give him strength. His eyes opened wider now, and they searched her face as if trying to understand her. "You saved me," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, but the words were clear. Sarah looked away for a moment, embarrassed. Anyone would have done the same, but deep down, she knew that was not true. Many would have run from the sight of a hand pushing through the soil. Many would have been too afraid. She had stayed. She had chosen to help. The man's lips trembled as he spoke again. "I thought I would die here." Sarah pressed her hand gently on his arm. "Not while I'm here." He gave a small, weak nod, then closed his eyes. Sarah's mind raced. She could not leave him here, but carrying him through the forest alone was impossible. He was too heavy, and the path too rough. She bit her lip, thinking quickly. The road was at least a mile away, maybe more. If she could reach someone, she could bring help. But leaving him alone felt dangerous. What if he stopped breathing? What if he slipped back into the ground, his fragile body giving up the fight? Her eyes moved to his face. He looked older than she had first thought, perhaps in his mid-40s. His features, though strained, showed signs of a life once filled with confidence and strength. Now, he seemed almost childlike in his weakness. "Can you walk?" she asked gently. He opened his eyes again and shook his head. "Not far." Sarah stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. She glanced around, searching the forest floor. Nearby, several fallen branches lay across the ground. She gathered them quickly, tying them together with the straps from her backpack. Bit by bit, she built a small frame, enough to drag him if she had to. It was rough, but it would have to do. She returned to him, kneeling again. "I'll help you onto this. We'll move slowly. Just trust me." The man looked at her, his eyes shining with something more than gratitude. There was disbelief, as if he could not understand why a stranger cared enough to fight for him. With all her strength, Sarah lifted and guided him onto the frame. He groaned softly in pain, but she held him steady until he settled. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Sarah gave him a small smile. "Save your thanks. Let's just get you out of here." She gripped the makeshift frame and began to drag it slowly across the leaves. Her muscles strained, and sweat dampened her forehead. But she kept going. Step by step, the path opened before them. Behind her, the man whispered something again. The words were soft, fragile, almost lost in the rustle of the forest. But she heard them. "If I don't make it, tell her I tried." Sarah's chest tightened. She did not know who her was, but she felt the weight in his words. They were heavy with regret, heavy with pain that reached beyond the wounds on his body. She did not answer. Instead, she kept walking, pulling him with every ounce of strength she had. The forest was no longer silent. It was alive with the sound of one woman's struggle and one man's fight to survive. And though Sarah did not know it, each step was carrying them both toward a truth that would change their lives. Asterisk. By the time Sarah dragged the man to the edge of the forest, night had begun to fall. The sky glowed faintly with the last colors of sunset, fading into the dark. Her arms and back ached, but she pushed herself harder. Step by step, she could not abandon him halfway. At last, through the trees, she saw it, a small cabin, worn but still standing. It belonged to an old neighbor who had moved away years ago. She knew it would be empty, but it could offer shelter. She pulled the frame to the door, her breath heavy. With effort, she opened it and guided the man inside. Dust clung to the air, but the walls still stood strong. She lowered him onto a wooden cot in the corner, covering him with a thin blanket she found folded on a chair. The man exhaled, a sound of both pain and relief. His eyes followed her as she lit an old oil lamp on the table. The warm glow filled the small space, pushing away the dark corners. "Better?" she asked softly. He nodded weakly. "Yes, thank you." Sarah poured a little more water into a cup and brought it to him. He drank slowly, each swallow easing his cracked throat. His hands trembled as he held the cup, so she steadied it for him. When he finished, she placed it aside and sat on the chair near his bed. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of wood and the faint sound of wind outside. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Do you have a name?" He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. His voice came rough, but steady enough to understand. "Michael." Sarah repeated it softly. "Michael, I'm Sarah." Michael's lips formed a faint smile, though his eyes remained tired. "Sarah, you saved me." Her gaze dropped to her dirt-covered hands. "I just did what anyone should do." Michael's expression changed. His eyes grew heavy, as though carrying thoughts too deep to share. He whispered, almost to himself, "Not everyone would." Sarah let the silence rest for a moment. She studied him closely. His clothes, though ruined, had once been fine. His watch, though scratched, still glimmered with wealth. He was not an ordinary man. She could not understand how someone like him ended up buried alive in the woods. "Michael," she said gently, "how did you get there?" His body stiffened. His hand clenched the blanket. For a moment, his eyes seemed to look past her, lost in a memory too painful to name. He shook his head slowly. "Not now." Sarah nodded. She did not press him. She could see his body needed rest, more than his mind needed to explain. Instead, she stood and moved about the cabin. She found a small kettle and filled it with water from her bottle. Setting it near the oil lamp, she waited as the heat rose. Soon, steam curled into the air. She poured it into a cup with a few dry herbs she carried in her bag for her own tired nights. Bringing it to him, she said, "Drink this. It'll help." Michael took it with shaky hands. The warmth of the cup seemed to ease him as much as the drink itself. After a few sips, his breathing steadied and his eyes softened. "You remind me," he whispered suddenly. His voice broke, but he continued, "of someone I once knew, someone who cared. Before I lost her." Sarah's chest tightened. She said nothing, only watched as his eyes grew wet with unspoken sorrow. He turned his head slightly, staring at the wooden ceiling. "I had everything: money, power, a name people respected, but none of it kept me from losing the only person who mattered." Sarah listened quietly, her own heart stirred by his words. She thought of Daniel, her son, sleeping far away in the care of a neighbor tonight. She thought of the nights she cried quietly, wondering if she was enough for him. Michael's whisper returned to her ears. "Tell her I'm sorry." Sarah leaned closer. But his eyes closed, and sleep pulled him away before he could answer. Sarah sat back in the chair, watching him breathe. The forest outside was dark and still, but inside the small cabin, two broken lives had crossed paths, and though neither of them fully understood it yet, that night marked the beginning of something neither could have expected. The night deepened, and the forest outside sank into silence. The oil lamp flickered softly, painting shadows on the wooden walls. Sarah sat in the chair near Michael's cot, her back straight, her hands clasped together. Michael slept fitfully, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Every so often, he stirred, whispering words she could not understand. His face, though handsome in its own way, looked older under the weight of suffering. Sarah rested her chin on her hand, staring at him quietly. She wondered again who he truly was. His clothes, his watch, his manner of speaking, all pointed to a man who once lived far above her world of struggle. Yet here he was, lying weak in a forgotten cabin, owing his life to a woman who barely made enough to survive. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the creak of the cabin and the distant call of night birds. Thoughts of her son filled her mind. Daniel would be asking where she was, why she had not come home yet. Guilt pricked her heart, but she reminded herself that saving this man had become her duty now. She could not have walked away. A soft sound drew her back. Michael shifted, his lips moving. Sarah leaned closer, straining to hear. His voice was low, broken, but clear enough this time. "Forgive me, Anna." Sarah froze. Anna. The name cut through the silence. Whoever Anna was, she was the reason behind his whispered sorrow. Sarah reached for the blanket, adjusting it over him. His face softened slightly at her touch, as if the warmth brought him comfort. She whispered back, though he could not hear, "Whoever Anna is, She must have meant everything to you. For a long time she watched him sleep. She thought about the way people carried regrets, heavy as stones. She carried her own, losing her marriage, raising Daniel alone, every mistake that had left her here. But she had learned to keep moving, to fight with what little she had. When Michael finally stirred awake, the moon was high outside the window. His eyes opened slowly, finding her sitting beside him. "You're still here," he said weakly. Sarah nodded. "You needed someone to watch over you." A faint smile touched his lips. "You don't even know me, and yet you stayed." She returned his look with calm eyes. "Sometimes that's all it takes. Not knowing, just doing what's right." Michael's throat tightened. He turned his head away, staring at the wall. If only more people thought that way. Sarah tilted her head. "What happened to you, Michael?" He stayed silent for a while. Then, with a slow breath, he spoke. "I trusted the wrong people. Partners, friends. I thought they stood with me. But they wanted everything I had. Money, shares, my company. They wanted me gone." His voice cracked. "So they tried to bury me, literally." Sarah's breath caught. She stared at him, horrified. "They left you to die." He nodded faintly. "And maybe I deserved it. I was blind to the truth for too long. I hurt people too. People I loved." His voice grew quiet. "Anna." Sarah leaned closer, waiting. Michael's eyes grew wet again. "She was my wife. I lost her because I cared more for wealth than for her heart. I thought success would keep her close. Instead, it pushed her away. And when she needed me most, I wasn't there." His chest shook with the effort of speaking. Sarah placed a hand gently on his arm. "You regret it." He turned to her, his eyes heavy with sorrow. "Every day. And now, all I can say is, if I don't make it, tell her I'm sorry." Sarah's lips trembled. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Michael, sometimes it isn't too late. Sometimes the chance comes when you least expect it." He stared at her, searching her face, as though trying to find truth in her words. For the first time that night, the silence between them felt less heavy. It carried something fragile, like hope, though faint and uncertain. Sarah sat back, her gaze drifting to the window. The moonlight spilled across the floor, soft and steady. The night stretched on, carrying with it two strangers bound now by pain, regret, and the faint spark of trust. And though Sarah did not know what tomorrow would bring, she knew she could not abandon him. Not yet. *. Morning came slowly. The first rays of light slipped through the cracks of the wooden cabin, brushing the walls with gold. The forest outside stirred awake, birds calling softly in the distance. Sarah had barely slept, her head resting against the chair beside the cot. When she opened her eyes, Michael was already awake, watching the light filter in. "You stayed," he said, his voice still weak but clearer than the night before. Sarah straightened and gave a small smile. "Of course, you needed me here." She stood and poured the last of her water into the kettle, heating it by the lamp. Soon she held a warm cup of tea in her hands. Kneeling beside him, she offered it carefully. "Drink, it'll help." Michael took it, his fingers trembling, but he managed to sip slowly. The warmth colored his face faintly, and he leaned back against the pillow. "You've done more for me than anyone has in years." Sarah looked away. "I only did what was right." Michael's gaze lingered on her, and yet no one else would have walked into the woods and dug a stranger out of the ground. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She thought of Daniel again, her son waiting back home. She thought of all the nights she had struggled alone, wishing someone would come and make life lighter, easier. But no one did. She carried her burdens quietly, the way most mothers did. "You mentioned Anna," Sarah said gently, breaking the silence. Michael's face shifted, grief returning to his eyes. He set the cup aside, his shoulders trembling. "Anna was everything. She believed in me when I had nothing. I promised her the world, but instead I gave her loneliness, my work, my greed, my hunger for success. It left no space for her. She begged me to slow down. I didn't listen." Sarah's heart ached at his words. She thought of her own story, the husband who left when the weight grew too heavy, the nights she stayed awake wondering why love had not been enough. Michael continued, his voice breaking. "She died before I could make it right, before I could tell her I was sorry, and that regret, it buried me long before those men ever did." Sarah reached for his hand, steadying his trembling fingers. "You loved her. That love is still here, even if she's gone." His eyes met hers, wet with tears, but had never showed it when it mattered. Her voice grew firm, though soft. "Then show it now." Show it by living differently. Regret doesn't have to be the end of your story, Michael. For a long moment, he stared at her. The light from the morning sun touched his face, softening the lines of pain. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. "You don't owe me anything." Sarah's throat tightened. She thought of Daniel, of the lessons she wanted her son to learn. She wanted him to see that kindness mattered, that helping others was worth more than anything. "Because," she said, "if I walked away, I'd lose myself too. Helping you reminds me of who I am, and what I want to teach my son." Michael blinked, surprised. "You have a child?" She nodded. "Daniel. He's 6. My reason for everything." Michael's eyes softened. "He's lucky to have a mother like you." Sarah gave a faint smile, though her heart ached with worry. She wondered how Daniel was sleeping, if he was scared without her. Michael shifted weakly, his voice almost breaking. "Sarah, if I live through this, I swear, I won't waste what's left. I don't deserve another chance, but if I have it, I'll use it." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Then start by resting, one step at a time." The morning light filled the cabin, wrapping them both in its quiet embrace. For the first time since Sarah had found him in the dirt, Michael's breathing slowed, no longer filled with only pain. And though shadows of the past still haunted him, a fragile hope had begun to take root. By afternoon, Michael could stand with Sarah's help. His steps were slow, his body still fragile, but the color had returned to his face. Sarah supported him as they walked outside the cabin, the sunlight spilling across the forest floor. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and earth. Birds sang in the trees, their voices light and clear. For the first time since the night before, Sarah allowed herself to breathe deeply, her chest no longer tight with fear. Michael paused near the path, leaning against the tree for support. His eyes moved over the forest as though seeing it differently now. "I thought this place would be my grave," he said quietly, "but instead, it gave me another chance." Sarah stood beside him, her hands folded. "Sometimes life gives us moments like that, hard moments that wake us up." He turned to her, his expression filled with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Her lips curved into a small smile. "You already did. You're still here." For a while, they stood in silence, listening to the forest breathe around them. Michael's gaze lowered, his voice trembling. "Last night, I whispered something. You heard it, didn't you?" Sarah nodded slowly. "You said, 'Tell her I'm sorry.'" His throat tightened, and his eyes shone with tears. "I meant it. More than anything, I thought if I died in that grave, at least the earth would carry those words for me. But maybe they were meant for someone who could hear them." Sarah's own eyes grew wet. She thought of Daniel again, of how precious love was, how easily it slipped away when neglected. "You can't speak those words to Anna anymore," she said gently. "But you can honor her memory by living differently, by choosing love over greed, by choosing people over power." Michael's chest rose unsteadily, his voice breaking. "Will I ever be able to forgive myself?" Sarah placed a hand on his arm, steady and warm. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about what you do after. Start there." His lips trembled, and for the first time, he allowed himself to cry openly. Tears slipped down his face, falling onto the leaves at his feet. Sarah felt her own tears rise, moved by the weight of his pain, and the fragile hope that still glimmered within him. They stood there together, both crying quietly, not out of weakness but out of something deeper. Pain shared, regret released, and hope born again. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice steadier. "If I live long enough to rebuild, I want to help people like you, Sarah. People who give without asking, people who carry the world on their shoulders quietly." Sarah blinked, startled. "You don't need to promise me anything." But Michael shook his head. "I do. You saved me when you had nothing to gain. You gave me more than life. You gave me a reason to live it." The forest around them seemed brighter, the morning light breaking fully through the branches. Sarah nodded slowly, her heart heavy, but also lightened. "Then make it count. That's all I ask." Michael straightened, his strength slowly returning. He looked at her with quiet intensity, his voice filled with gratitude. "You saved me, Sarah. Not just from the earth, from myself." Her chest tightened at his words. She turned her eyes toward the path leading out of the forest. Somewhere down that road, her son was waiting, and her life of quiet struggle would continue. But now, she carried something different inside her, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could change the course of someone else's story. Together, they began walking slowly down the path, step by step, Two strangers bound not by fate, but by choice. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of their tears, their regrets, and their fragile hope. And though their lives would soon part again, both knew they would never forget what had been whispered in the silence of the woods.